The message came at 3 in the morning, ship time. Ambassador Alina Vasquez was deep in sleep when her personal console started screaming with priority alerts. She threw off her blankets and stumbled across the small cabin, her eyes barely open. When she read the words on the screen, sleep left her completely. Humanity had been invited to the Millennia Summit. Alina read the message 3 times before she believed it. The Millennia Summit was the most important gathering in galactic history. It happened once every 1,000 years, and during that meeting, the Galactic Council made laws that would govern all spacefaring civilizations until the next summit. Every major decision about trade, territory, technology, and species rights came from these meetings, and humanity had only been traveling among the stars for 83 years. They were babies compared to the other species. The Velkar, the insect-like beings who founded the council, had been building empires when humans were still learning to make fire. The Crethon had mapped the galaxy while humans were painting on cave walls. Every other species at the summit would have thousands of years of history behind them. Humanity had less than a century. Alina knew this invitation was not an honor. It was a message. The council wanted humanity to see how small they were. They wanted humans to understand their place in the galaxy. She sent a reply accepting the invitation, and spent the next 6 hours in meetings with Earth Command. By the time the UN's Defiance changed course toward the Citadel of Concordance, Alina had her orders. She was to observe, learn, and report back. She was not to cause trouble. The journey took 3 weeks. Alina spent that time studying everything humanity knew about the Council and its 12 founding races. She learned their histories, their customs, their languages. She memorized the names of important leaders and the proper ways to address them. She prepared herself for every possible situation. Nothing prepared her for what she saw when she arrived. The Citadel of Concordance was not a space station. It was a small moon that had been hollowed out and rebuilt over millions of years. It orbited a dying red star, and its surface was covered with towers and domes and structures that defied human understanding. Ships from 1,000 different worlds surrounded it like insects around a hive. Alina counted at least 50 different designs, and those were just the ones close enough to see clearly. The Defiance was directed to a docking bay reserved for minor species. Alina noticed that the bay was located far from the main chambers, in a section that received less light and less attention. The message was clear. Humanity was not important here. She was met by a Valkyrie official who introduced himself as Subarbiter Keth. He was tall and thin, with a hard exoskeleton that gleamed under the dim lights. His compound eyes showed no emotion as he looked at Alina, but his voice carried something like contempt. "You are the human representative," Keth said. It was not a question. "Ambassador Alina Vasquez," she replied. "Thank you for receiving us." Keth made a sound that might have been a laugh. The Council grants observer status to all spacefaring species, regardless of their development level. It is tradition. You will be shown to the observer gallery. You will watch. You will not speak. These are the rules. Lena nodded. She had expected this. "I understand." "I doubt that," Keth said. "But you will learn." No. He led her through corridors that seemed to go on forever. They passed beings of every shape and size. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others floated through the air, or crawled along the walls, or moved in ways Alina could not describe. She saw creatures made of crystal, and creatures made of shadow, and creatures that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, and everywhere she looked, she saw the symbols of caste. Every being wore a mark that identified their role in galactic society. Workers wore gray. Scientists wore blue. Warriors wore red. Leaders wore gold. The marks were not just decorations. They were identities. They told everyone exactly who you were and what you were allowed to do. Alina noticed that the beings in gray outnumbered all the others combined. They kept their heads down and moved quickly, trying not to be noticed. When they passed beings with higher marks, they stepped aside and waited. Something cold settled in Alina's stomach. Keth brought her to a small room overlooking the main chamber. The observer gallery was filled with representatives from other minor species, all of them watching in silence. Below, on the chamber floor, the delegates of the founding races sat in positions of honor. Their seats were raised above everyone else. Their voices were amplified so that all could hear. High Arbiter Zethron of the Velkari stood at the center. He was ancient, even by his species' standards. His exoskeleton was decorated with patterns that told of his long service to the council. When he spoke, every being in the chamber fell silent. "We gather as our ancestors gathered," Zethron said, "to determine the shape of the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. Let the business of the summit begin." Lena watched as the council began its work. They discussed trade agreements and territorial boundaries and technological restrictions. They made decisions that would affect billions of lives. And they did it with the casual confidence of beings who had never been questioned. Then came the matter of species classification. One by one, civilizations were called before the council and assigned their roles. The Morthane, a young species with promising minds, were designated scientific caste with limitations. The Drovik, strong and hardy, were assigned to military support. Each species accepted their classification without argument. It was the way things had always been done. Then Zethron called humanity's name. "The humans of Earth," he said. "A young species, spacefaring for less than 100 standard years. Limited technological development. No significant contributions to galactic knowledge or culture." Lena felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her. Based on assessment of their biological capabilities and resource acquisition history, Zethron continued, "The Council classifies humanity as labor caste, resource extraction. This classification is permanent and binding under the doctrine of predetermined ascension." The words hit Alina like a physical blow. Labor caste? Resource extraction? Humanity would be miners and haulers and workers. Forbidden from science, forbidden from military advancement, forbidden from ever having a voice in galactic affairs, forever. She stood before she knew what she was doing. "I request the right to address the council." The chamber went completely silent. Keth, who was standing nearby, looked at her with something like horror. Zethron's compound eyes fixed on her. "Observer species do not speak. This has always been the way. With respect, High Arbiter, I must protest this classification. Humanity has not been properly evaluated. We have capabilities that your assessment did not consider." "The assessment is complete," Zethron said. "The classification stands. You will be silent or you will be removed." Lena wanted to argue. She wanted to fight. But she was alone, surrounded by beings who saw her as nothing more than an insect that had wandered into a palace. She sat down slowly, her hands shaking with anger. That night, she returned to the Defiance and opened a secure channel to Earth. She told them everything. The classification. The caste system. The fact that humanity had just been condemned to eternal servitude by beings who had never even asked their opinion. The response came directly from United Earth Command. Signed by every member of the Global Council. Observe nothing. Humanity speaks for itself. Do whatever is necessary. Lena read the message twice. Then she smiled. The Council had made its decision about humanity's future, but humanity had not agreed, and Alina Vasquez was about to teach the galaxy. What happened when humans were told to stay silent? Alina did not sleep that night. Instead, she walked through the lower sections of the Citadel. The areas where the gray-marked workers lived and labored. Security was lighter here. The founding races did not believe anyone important would visit these forgotten corridors. That was their first mistake. She found the maintenance workers first. They were small beings called the Navari, covered in soft fur that had turned gray from years of working in dusty corridors. They looked at Alina with surprise and fear when she approached them. "I am not here to cause trouble," Alina said softly. "I just want to talk." The oldest Navari, a female with tired eyes, studied Alina carefully. "Humans," she said, "we have heard of you. Young species. Assigned to labor caste today," yes, Alina said. "Like you." The Navari made a sound that was almost a laugh. "We have been labor caste for 6,000 years. Our ancestors were scientists once. Then the council decided we were more useful cleaning their floors. Alina sat down on a dusty crate, bringing herself to the Navari's eye level. What was it like? Being scientists? For a moment, the old Navara's eyes lit up with something like hope. Then the light faded. I do not know. That was before my grandmother's grandmother's time. We only have stories now. They talk for hours. The Navari told Alina about their history, about the dreams they had been forced to forget. Alina listened to every word. She did not promise anything. She did not make grand speeches. She simply listened, and that was enough. Word spread quickly through the lower sections. The human ambassador was talking to the workers, not giving orders, not demanding service, talking, listening, treating them like they mattered. Over the next 3 days, Alina met with dozens of species. The Torgan, massive, gentle beings who carried cargo on their broad backs. The Axiom, a collective intelligence that the Council used as living computers, but refused to recognize as sentient. The Rilith, fly. Beautiful crystalline beings who had been classified as decorative and forbidden from using their natural gift for understanding the universe. Each species had the same. They had been assigned their role thousands of years ago. They had accepted it because they had no choice. And they had been waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for someone to tell them that things could be different. Alina did not tell them to rebel. She did not promise revolution. She simply asked questions that no one had ever asked before. What would you be if you could choose? What do you dream about when you allow yourself to dream? What if the Council was wrong about you? Those questions spread through the lower sections like fire. And while Alina planted seeds of doubt, she also gathered something else: information. The Citadel was ancient, and its systems were complex. The founding races controlled the main networks, but the workers controlled the physical infrastructure. They knew every corridor, every access panel, every forgotten system that still connected to the central chambers. They had been invisible for so long that no one thought to hide secrets from them. On the 4th day of the summit, Alina put her plan into action. The Council had gathered to finalize humanity's classification. High Arbiter Zethron stood at his podium, the ceremonial seal in his hand. Around him, the delegates of the founding races waited with patient boredom. This was routine to them. Just another young species being put in its proper place. Zethron began to speak. Let the record show that humanity of Earth is hereby classified as... Every light in the Citadel flickered and died. For 3 heartbeats, the chamber was completely dark. Then the screens came back online, but they did not show the Council's seal. They showed an image that made every being in the chamber fall silent. It was a photograph taken by a human spacecraft long ago. A small, blue planet floating in a beam of sunlight against the infinite darkness of space. Earth, humanity's home. A pale blue dot that looked so fragile and yet contained everything that humans had ever known or loved. And then Elena's voice filled the chamber, amplified through every speaker in the Citadel. The Galactic Council has made its decision about humanity's future. Humanity respectfully declines. Chaos erupted. Delegates shouted in 100 different languages. Security forces rushed toward the observer gallery. Zethron's compound eyes blazed with fury as he demanded to know how this had happened. Alina walked calmly down from the gallery and onto the main floor. Guards moved to stop her, but she raised her hand and spoke clearly. I invoke the right of challenge. Under Section 447 of the Council's founding charter, any species facing permanent classification may challenge that classification by presenting evidence of capabilities not considered in the original assessment. The chamber fell silent. Zethron stared at her with something that might have been shock. You know our laws? He said slowly. I have spent 83 years learning everything I could about this galaxy, Alina replied. Humanity does not waste time. Zethron conferred with the other founding race leaders. They argued in hushed voices, their body language showing disagreement. Finally, the High Arbiter turned back to Alina. The right of challenge has not been invoked in 4,000 years, but the law still stands. You may present your evidence, Alina smiled. Thank you, High Arbiter. But first, I would like to address a question that I know is on everyone's mind. How did a primitive species hack into the Citadel's ancient systems? She paused, letting the silence build. The answer is simple. We did not hack anything. We asked. She gestured toward the maintenance corridors, and the Navari workers who had helped her stepped forward into the light. Behind them came Torgan cargo handlers and Axiom processors and dozens of other species that the Council had never bothered to notice. For 12,000 years, you have treated these beings as tools, Elena said. You have used them to build your stations and clean your chambers and carry your cargo. You have never asked their names. You have never asked their opinions. You have never considered that they might have thoughts and dreams and hopes of their own. She turned to face the founding races directly. We did. We asked, we listened, and they helped us. Because in 83 years of spacefaring, humanity has shown them more respect than you have shown in 12,000 years of rule. The chamber was completely silent. Elena could see the founding race delegates looking at the workers with new eyes, suddenly aware of how many there were. Suddenly understanding how much they had taken for granted, she pulled out a data device and activated a holographic display. It showed a document titled The Declaration of Sovereign Potential. This is humanity's response to the doctrine of predetermined ascension, Elena said. It states a simple principle. No species' future should be determined by anyone other than that species itself. Every civilization should have the right to grow, to change, to reach for potential that has not yet been imagined. High Arbiter Zethron rose from his seat, his ancient body trembling with anger. This is rebellion, he said. This is a direct challenge to the Council's authority.
Ow.
No, Elena replied calmly. This is democracy. This is self-determination. This is the belief that every being deserves the chance to become more than what others expect them to be. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from every caste. Humanity did not come here to accept a role that was assigned to us without our consent. We came here to ask a question that this council has been afraid to ask for. 12,000 years? She raised her voice so that every being in the Citadel could hear. What would the galaxy look like if everyone was free to choose their own future? The silence that followed was deeper than space itself. And in that silence, Lena saw something she had hoped for but never expected. Movement in the lower galleries where the minor species sat. Delegates were standing up. Not many at first, but then more and more. They were not speaking. They were not protesting. They were simply standing, showing that they had heard, showing that they were no longer willing to be invisible. High Arbiter Zethron looked at the rising tide of silent defiance, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. The council recessed in chaos. For the first time in 12,000 years, a summit session ended without proper closure. Delegates scattered through the Citadel, some shouting in anger, others whispering in fear, and a growing number simply watching in silence. Waiting to see what would happen next, Elena was escorted back to the human delegation's quarters by a squad of Velkari guards. They did not speak to her. They did not need to. Their stiff movements and clenched mandibles told her everything she needed to know about how the founding races felt. She was not afraid. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. Within an hour of returning to her quarters, Elena began receiving visitors. They came one at a time, slipping through corridors they knew better than any security patrol. The first was a Rylith scientist named Crystal in Voice in Darkness, though she asked Elena to call her Crystal. Crystal was beautiful in the way that frozen starlight was beautiful. Her body was made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. But her eyes held a sadness that no amount of beauty could hide. I have studied quantum mechanics for 300 years, Crystal said. I have made discoveries that could revolutionize energy production throughout the galaxy. But I am not allowed to publish my work. I am not allowed to teach. I am classified as decorative caste. My purpose is to be looked at, not listened to. Lena took her hand, feeling the cool smoothness of Crystal against her skin. What would you do if you were free to choose? I would build a school, Crystal said immediately. I would teach anyone who wanted to learn. I would show them that the universe is beautiful not because of how it looks, but because of how it works. More visitors came. A Torgan named Groundshaker, who had carried cargo for 2 centuries but dreamed of building starships. An Axiom collective that called itself the Ones Who Remember, who had been forced to process data for the Council but secretly preserved the histories of every species that had been erased. A young Navari maintenance worker named Quick Hands, who had never known anything but service but still dared to hope for something more. Each of them had been told what they were. Each of them knew, deep in their hearts, that they could be more. Alina listened to all of them, and as she listened, a plan began to form. The Council fears us because we challenged their authority publicly, she said during a secret meeting in the maintenance tunnels. But we are still just one species. They can dismiss us as troublemakers. They can punish us as an example. What they cannot do is punish everyone. She looked around at the gathered representatives, seeing hope and fear in equal measure on their faces. I propose that we form an alliance. Not a military force, but a coalition of voices. Every species that believes in the right to choose their own future, every civilization that refuses to accept a role they did not choose, they will call it rebellion, Groundshaker rumbled, his deep voice echoing through. The tunnels, let them, Elena said. Words only have power if we accept their meaning. We are not rebels. We are citizens demanding our rights. We are not enemies of the Council. We are friends of freedom. The Ones Who Remember spoke, their collective voice harmonizing like a strange choir. We have records of 317 species that were destroyed by the Council for challenging the established order. Their histories were erased. Their names were forgotten. If we join you, we may share their fate. Alina nodded slowly. Yes, you might. I cannot promise you safety. I cannot promise you victory. The only thing I can promise is that if we do nothing, nothing will ever change. Our children will be workers like us. Their children will be workers. Forever, until the stars themselves burn out. She stood up, her small human form somehow filling the tunnel with presence. The Council has ruled for 12,000 years because no one believed change was possible. They have kept their power by keeping everyone separate, by convincing each species that they are alone, that no one else shares their dreams. But look around this room. Look at how many of us there are. We were never alone. We just never knew it. Quick Hands raised her small paw. What do you want us to do? For now, nothing visible. Go back to your work. Keep your heads down. But spread the word quietly. Find others who share our beliefs. Build connections. When the time comes to stand together, we need to know who will stand with us. The meeting ended with no grand declarations, no oaths of loyalty, just a quiet understanding that something had changed, something that could not be unchanged. Over the next 2 days, the coalition of sovereign species grew in the shadows. Alina received reports from every section of the Citadel. The movement was spreading faster than anyone expected. Species that had been enemies for centuries were finding common ground in their shared desire for freedom. Old grudges faded in the face of new hope, but the founding races were not idle. On the 3rd day, Elena received a formal summons to the council chamber. She walked through corridors that felt different now, charged with tension that had not existed before. When she entered the chamber, she found all 12 founding race leaders waiting for her. High Arbiter Zethron stood at the center, his ancient exoskeleton gleaming under harsh lights. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his voice carrying no warmth. The council has considered your ... disruption. We have examined your so-called declaration of sovereign potential, and we have reached a conclusion. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Humanity has committed a grave offense against galactic order. You have spread sedition among the lower castes. You have challenged laws that have maintained peace for 12,000 years. You have shown that your species is not merely primitive, but dangerous. Alina stood straight, showing no fear. We have exercised rights guaranteed by your own charter. We have spoken to beings you ignore. We have asked questions you refuse to answer. If that is dangerous, then perhaps your peace is not as stable as you believed. Zethron's compound eyes fixed on her with cold fury. The Council hereby invokes the doctrine of existential threat. When a species poses a danger to galactic stability, the Council has the authority to order its correction. The word hung in the air like poison. Correction. Alina knew what it meant. Everyone knew. 317 species had been corrected throughout Council history. Not one of them existed anymore. "You're sentencing humanity to death," she said quietly, "for the crime of believing in freedom." "We are protecting the galaxy from chaos," Zethron replied. "The vote will be held in 3 standard days. Until then, you will remain confined to your quarters. Any attempt to contact other species will be treated as further evidence of sedition." Guards moved to surround Alina. She did not resist as they led her away, but she did not despair either, because even as she walked toward confinement, she could see the faces of the workers who lined the corridors. The Navari who cleaned the floors, the Torgan who carried the supplies, the countless beings who had been invisible for so long. They were watching her, and in their eyes, she saw something the Council could not see. They were ready. That night, Alina sent one final message to Earth, using a frequency the Council did not know existed. Through equipment that Quick Hands had installed in her quarters, they voted to destroy us. "We have 3 days. Send everything." The response came within the hour. "Fleet mobilizing. But this is not our fight alone. You have given them hope. Now show them how to use it. Remember who we are. Remember what we survived. And remember, humanity never goes quietly." Alina read the message and smiled grimly. The Council thought they were dealing with one small species that had gotten too bold. They had no idea that they had awakened something much larger, something that had been sleeping in the hearts of 1,000 civilizations, waiting for someone to speak its name. Freedom, and freedom, once awakened, could not be put back to sleep. The day of the vote arrived with cold certainty. Alina was escorted from her quarters by 12 guards, more than had ever been assigned to a single delegate in Council history. They treated her like she was carrying a weapon. In a way, she supposed she was. The Council chamber was full beyond capacity. Every seat was taken. Every gallery was packed. Word had spread throughout the Citadel that something historic was about to happen. Species that had ignored summit proceedings for centuries now crowded into every available space, watching with eyes and sensors and organs that humans had no names for. Alina noticed something strange as she was led to her position. The observer galleries, traditionally filled with passive witnesses who watched in silence, were different today. The beings there were not sitting passively. They were standing, and they had removed their caste insignia. Quick Hands had told her this might happen. She had not allowed herself to believe it until now. High Arbiter Zethron called the session to order, but his voice seemed smaller than before. The weight of all those watching eyes pressed down on the chamber like a physical force. The Council convenes to vote on the doctrine of existential threat as applied to the human species of Earth, Zethron announced. The charges are sedition, corruption of lower caste species, and deliberate destabilization of galactic order. He turned to face Alina. "Before the vote proceeds, the accused species may speak final words. This is tradition." Alina stepped forward. She had spent 3 days in confinement, but she had not been idle. Quick Hands and the other coalition members had smuggled in data chips, reports, and evidence. She had studied everything. She knew exactly what she needed to say. "High Arbiter," she began, "honorable members of the Council, citizens of the galaxy, I stand before you accused of threatening galactic stability. I am told that humanity is dangerous. I am told that we must be destroyed to protect the order that has governed this galaxy for 12,000 years. She paused, looking around the chamber. "I will not argue that we are not dangerous. We are. Every species that believes in freedom is dangerous to those who profit from bondage. Every voice that speaks truth is dangerous to those who rule through lies." Murmurs rippled through the galleries. Alina continued, "But I did not come here to defend humanity. I came here to show you something. Something that the Council has hidden for 12,000 years. She pulled out a data chip and activated the chamber's display systems. The Coalition's technicians had given her access codes that even the founding races did not know existed. Images began to appear on every screen in the chamber. "This is the Arinith," Alina said. A hologram showed a graceful species with elongated bodies and multiple arms. 4,000 years ago, they developed a clean energy technology that would have made fuel monopolies obsolete. The Council classified them as existentially threatening. They were corrected. Their technology was destroyed. Their history was erased. The image changed. This is the Dreth. A proud species with scaled skin and bright eyes appeared. 6,000 years ago, they invented a system of government where leaders were chosen by the people instead of inherited by birth. The Council called this cognitively unstable. They were corrected. Image after image filled the screens. Species after species, civilization after civilization, the Ketheri, who believed all beings deserved education, corrected. The Luminous Collective, who tried to share their medicine freely, corrected. The Stone Singers, who wrote songs about equality, corrected. Lena's voice grew stronger with each name. 317 species, 317 civilizations. Each one destroyed not because they threatened the galaxy, but because they threatened the power of the founding races. Each one erased from history so thoroughly that their own children would never know they existed. She turned to face Zethron directly. This is not justice. This is not stability. This is murder on a scale that makes every war in human history look like a minor disagreement. And you have done it while telling yourselves that you are the guardians of peace. The chamber erupted. Delegates from the founding races shouted denials. Representatives from lower caste species cried out in shock and anger. The guards moved toward Alina, but she raised her hand. "I invoke the right of evidence. Under Section 892 of your own charter, evidence presented during a final statement must be examined before a vote can proceed." Zethron's mandibles clicked with fury. This evidence is fabricated. The Axiom Collective that provided it is malfunctioning. These records do not exist. Then let us verify them, Alina said calmly. Open your archives. Let independent observers examine the records. If I am lying, it will be proven quickly. If I am telling the truth, she did not need to finish the sentence. The silence stretched. The founding race leaders conferred urgently among themselves. Alina could see the fear in their body language now. They had never expected their secrets to be exposed. They had never imagined that the beings they used as tools would turn against them. Finally, Zethron spoke. The right of evidence is denied. The records are classified under the doctrine of supreme security. The vote will proceed. Then you confirm it, Alina said quietly. You confirm that you have something to hide. You confirm that the order you protect is built on the graves of innocence. She looked around the chamber one final time. I cannot stop this vote. Humanity cannot stop this vote. But I ask everyone watching to remember this moment. Remember that when the truth was offered, the Council chose to hide it. Remember that when justice was demanded, the Council chose fear. The vote proceeded. One by one, the 12 founding races cast their decisions. 12 voices for correction. 12 votes for humanity's destruction. It was unanimous, as it had always been. Then came the ratification. Under Council law, major decisions required approval from the General Assembly. It was a formality. In 12,000 years, no decision had ever been rejected. The lower caste species always voted with their masters. They had no choice. Zethron called for ratification, his voice confident again now that the founding races had spoken, and nothing happened. The galleries remained silent. No one raised their hand. No one spoke their approval. The Assembly will ratify the decision of the Founding Council, Zethron repeated, his voice harder now. Still nothing. From somewhere in the back of the chamber, a single voice spoke. It was a Navari worker, old and tired, her fur more gray than brown. No, the word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Another voice joined. No, a Torgan, his massive body standing tall for the first time in his life. No, a Rilith scientist. Her crystalline form catching the light as she rose. No, an Axiom processor. Speaking with a voice it had never been allowed to use, the words spread through the chamber like fire, species after species, being after being, rising to their feet and speaking the word that the council had never expected to hear. No, no. No, Zethrin shouted for order. He demanded obedience. He threatened punishment. But the word kept coming. Hundreds of voices, thousands, a tide of refusal that washed over the chamber, drowned out everything else. Alina stood in the center of it all, tears streaming down her face. She had hoped for this. She had worked for this. But she had never truly believed it would happen. The coalition had found its voice. And that voice was saying no. Zethrin looked around the chamber, seeing his authority crumbling around him. The other founding race leaders were watching him, waiting for him to restore order, but he could not. Because for the first time in 12,000 years, the council had given an order, and the galaxy had refused to obey. "This vote is invalid," Zethrin declared. "The Assembly's participation is a formality, not a requirement. The council's decision stands. The correction fleet will launch." He turned to his military commanders. "Prepare the ships. Humanity will be corrected, with or without Assembly approval." Lena watched him go, knowing that the battle was not over. The vote had failed, but the founding races still had their military. They could still destroy humanity if they chose. But something had changed. Something that could never be unchanged. The galaxy had seen the lower castes stand together. The galaxy had heard them say no. And that image, that sound, would spread to every corner of every civilization. The founding races could destroy humanity. But they could not destroy what humanity had started. The revolution had begun. The correction fleet did not launch. Not because the founding races lacked the weapons. Not because their commanders had lost their courage. The ships were ready. The weapons were loaded. The coordinates were set, but ships need crews. Weapons need operators. And the beings who had spent 12,000 years serving in silence had finally decided to stop. It started small. An Avari engineer reported a fault in the main power conduit of the flagship. When technicians went to repair it, they found nothing wrong, but the repair took 3 days anyway. A Torgan loading crew moved ammunition so slowly that it would take a month to fully arm the fleet. Axiom navigation systems developed strange errors that sent ships in circles instead of toward Earth. No one refused directly. No one said the word rebellion. They simply stopped working efficiently. High Arbiter Zethron raged through the corridors of the Citadel, demanding explanations. His commanders promised to fix the problems. His administrators assured him that everything was under control, but nothing got fixed. Nothing was under control because the lower castes had learned something that the founding races had never understood. Their power came from the work of others. Their authority depended on the obedience of beings they had never bothered to respect. And obedience, it turned out, was not something that could be forced forever. Alina watched the slow collapse from her quarters. Receiving reports from coalition members throughout the fleet, she had not planned this. She had not ordered it. The workers had organized themselves, spreading tactics through whispered conversations and hidden messages. They had found their own way to resist. 3 weeks after the failed vote, Thrin called an emergency session of the founding council. The correction fleet was still stuck in orbit around the Citadel. Earth remained untouched. And worse, the news had spread. Across the galaxy, lower caste species were hearing the story. A human had stood before the council and demanded freedom. The workers of the Citadel had refused to obey. The great and ancient founding races had been stopped, not by weapons, but by the simple power of people saying no. The effect was like dropping a match in dry grass on Velkari Prime. Maintenance workers walked off their jobs, leaving the planetary government without power for 6 days. On the Crethon homeworld, cargo handlers refused to move shipments until their grievances were heard. On 100 other worlds, in 1,000 other ways, beings who had accepted their place for generations suddenly discovered that they did not have to accept it anymore. The founding races held emergency meetings. They debated military responses, punishment campaigns, examples that would teach the lower castes their proper place. But every option required workers to implement it, and the workers were no longer reliable. 1 month after the failed vote, High Arbiter Zethron requested a meeting with Alina. She was escorted to his private chambers, a place no human had ever seen. The room was ancient, decorated with the symbols of Valkyrie authority going back tens of thousands of years. But the symbols seemed smaller now, less impressive. Zethron stood by a window that looked out at the dying star the Citadel orbited. He seemed older than before, his exoskeleton showing cracks that Alina had not noticed during the summit. "You have destroyed everything we built," he said without turning around. "No," Alina replied. "I showed everyone that what you built was already broken. The cracks were always there. I just helped people see them." Zethron turned to face her. His compound eyes, usually so cold and alien, showed something that might have been exhaustion. 12,000 years, he said. 12,000 years of peace. 12,000 years of stability. We built something that lasted longer than any empire in galactic history. And you have torn it apart in 3 months. Peace built on slavery is not peace, Alina said. Stability bought with the silence of billions is not stability. It is a prison that looks like a palace. And what will you build in its place? Chaos? War? Every species fighting every other for supremacy. Alina shook her head. The coalition has a proposal. We call it the Compact of Mutual Ascension. No predetermined castes. No permanent classifications. Every species has the right to choose their own path. The founding races will still have a voice, but it will be one voice among thousands, not 12 voices above all. You expect us to surrender our authority? I expect you to share it. The galaxy has been carrying your weight for 12,000 years. It is time you learned to carry your own. Zethron was silent for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh. My advisors tell me we could still win. We could bring in loyal forces from distant sectors. We could crush the rebellion before it spreads further. We could make examples that would not be forgotten for 10,000 years. You could, Alina agreed. But at what cost? How many worlds would you have to burn? How many species would you have to destroy? And in the end, would you rule a galaxy or a graveyard? The old Valkyrie stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something that Alina never expected. He bowed his head. We will negotiate, he said quietly. May the stars forgive us for what we have done. And may they forgive me for not having the courage to stop it sooner. The negotiations took 6 months. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when everything seemed about to fall apart. But slowly, carefully, the new order was built. The Compact of Mutual Ascension was ratified by 94% of galactic civilizations. The largest consensus in recorded history. The caste system was abolished. The classification laws were repealed. Every species was granted the right to determine its own future. The coalition of sovereign. Species became the new governing body, with representatives from every member civilization. The founding races kept their seats, but they were 12 voices among thousands. Not rulers, but participants in the ongoing work of building a better galaxy. On the day the compact was signed, Alina stood on a platform overlooking the main chamber of the Citadel. The space that had once been reserved for the founding races was now filled with delegates from every corner of the galaxy. Navari scientists debated with Valkyrie engineers. Torgan architects planned projects with Crethon artists. Axiom philosophers discussed ideas with Rilith. Searchers, it was chaotic and loud and messy and wonderful. High Arbiter Zethron approached her one final time. He had accepted a position as a historical advisor to the new government, helping to preserve the truth about the past so that its mistakes would never be repeated. I have a question, he said. One that has haunted me since the summit began. Lena nodded. Ask, how did you know? How did you know the lower castes would stand with you? We gave them no reason to hope. We showed them no path to freedom. Yet when you called, they answered. Why? Alina thought about the question for a long moment. She thought about the Navari worker who had spoken the first no. She thought about the Torgan who had refused to carry weapons against people who had shown them kindness. She thought about the countless beings who had risked everything for a future they might never see. Because we were them once, she said finally. Humanity was told our place was fixed. We were told we should accept our role. We were told resistance was impossible. But we learned through centuries of struggle that the only impossible thing is convincing free beings to stay in chains forever. She looked out at the chamber full of delegates, seeing hope and uncertainty and determination on faces of every kind. You thought you understood us because you read our files. You knew our technology, our population, our military strength. But you missed the most important thing about humanity. We have never accepted that tomorrow has to look like yesterday. We have always believed that things can change, that people can grow, that the future is not written yet. She turned back to Zethrin. That belief is contagious. Once you show someone that change is possible, you cannot unshow them. Once you give someone hope, you cannot take it back. That is what we gave the lower castes. Not weapons. Not technology. Just the simple, stubborn, irrational belief that they deserved better than they had been given. Zethrin was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed, the deep bow of equals, the bow he had never given to any being outside his own species. May your species thrive for 10,000 years, Ambassador Vasquez, and may we be wise enough to learn from you. Lena returned the bow. May we be wise enough to learn from each other, High Arbiter. That is how galaxies grow. She boarded the Defiance and set course for home. Behind her, the Citadel of Concordance began its transformation from a symbol of control to a symbol of cooperation. It would take years, decades, maybe centuries, to fully heal the wounds of the old order. But the healing had begun, and in the observation logs of 1,000 civilizations, a single entry was recorded that would be taught to students for generations to come. The humans said no, and everything changed. Far away, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, the people of Earth looked up at the night sky and saw something new. Not an empty darkness full of distant threats, but a galaxy full of friends they had not yet met, of possibilities they had not yet imagined, of a future that belonged to everyone. They had been told their place. They had been told their limitations. They had been told to be silent, to accept, to obey. They had said no, and the galaxy would never be the same.